The Catfish Killer, 2019. I remember the first time I saw Brandon's profile on Instagram. He followed me after I posted a story about my favorite band, tagging their song in the background. He commented something simple like, "This song is fire." It wasn't anything unusual, just the kind of interaction I got all the time. I responded with a casual "right?" Totally underrated. From there, our conversations took off. Brandon seemed different. He wasn't like most of the people who messaged me. He talked about art, music, and philosophy, and he always had something interesting to say. Felt nice, you know? Like I'd found someone who really understood me. A couple of weeks in, he suggested we meet in person. I hesitated at first. It's not like I hadn't heard the warnings about meeting people from the internet, but Brandon seemed so normal, harmless even. After all, we'd been chatting for weeks and he never pushed me or came off as creepy. So when he invited me to a concert, I thought, why not? The night of the concert, everything seemed fine at first. He was sweet, shy even, and the show was amazing. But as the night wore on, I started noticing things. The way he'd watch me when I laughed at something someone else said. How his grip on my arm tightened when we moved through the crowd. I told myself I was overthinking it. Brandon had been nothing but kind to me. After the concert, a guy I knew from school ran into us. We chatted for a few minutes and Brandon just stood there. His face was blank, but his eyes were so intense, like he was trying to burn a hole through the guy. When we walked away, Brandon barely said a word. The silence between us was suffocating. By the time we got to his car, something felt off. He opened the passenger door for me, but instead of getting in, I hesitated. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Just tired." I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. I got in the car. As we drove, the tension grew unbearable. The quiet wasn't just awkward, it was charged, like something terrible was about to happen. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, like barely contained rage. "Why were you laughing so much with that guy?" I blinked, taken aback. "What?" "The guy at the concert," he said, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "You were all over him." I laughed nervously. "Brandon, he's just a friend. We were catching up. That's all." But he didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. My heart started pounding. I reached for my phone, trying to act casual. Maybe I could text someone, let them know I was scared. "Don't." His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "You don't need to text anyone." I froze. My stomach turned to ice. "Brandon, you're scaring me." His laugh was low and bitter. "I'm scaring you? After everything we've talked about, everything we've shared, you're scared of me?" He pulled the car over onto a deserted stretch of road. The headlights cast eerie shadows on the trees around us. My hands shook as I fumbled for the door handle, but it was locked. "Please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Just take me home." Brandon turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw him for who he really was. The warmth, the charm, it was all gone. In its place was something dark, twisted, and dangerous. "You don't get it, do you?" he said. "You're not leaving. Not after tonight." Panic surged through me. I screamed, kicking at the door, clawing at the lock. Brandon lunged toward me, his hands reaching out, and in that moment, I knew I had to fight. I don't remember everything that happened next. It was a blur of shouting, struggling, and pure adrenaline. I managed to unlock the door and tumble out onto the road. I ran as fast as I could, the cold night air biting at my skin. In the distance, I saw headlights, another car. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The car stopped and a man got out. Brandon's truck roared away into the darkness, his taillights vanishing like a bad dream. The driver called the police and I told them everything. Days later, they found Brandon, sitting in his car with a knife and a notebook full of disturbing entries about me. The police told me I was lucky. Lucky to have escaped. Lucky to be alive. But I don't feel lucky. I feel haunted. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face, hear his voice, and remember how close I came to never waking up again. The Craigslist Killer, a first-person horror narrative. I've always trusted my instincts. As someone who works in massage therapy, meeting clients through Craigslist seemed like an easy way to connect with people in need of my services. But that trust in my intuition, my ability to gauge people, was shattered one night in 2009. It started with a message from a man named Philip. His email was polite, almost overly formal, and he described himself as a med student in Boston looking for relaxation after his long hours at the hospital. It seemed harmless enough. His tone didn't set off any red flags and he sounded genuine. But hindsight is cruel. We arranged to meet at a hotel near Copley Square. Hotels were common for my work, neutral territory that made clients feel comfortable. When I arrived at the room, Philip opened the door. He looked just as he had described himself, clean-cut, wearing a crisp shirt, his hair neatly combed. "Julissa, right?" he asked with a smile. I nodded, stepping inside. The room was clean, standard, nothing unusual. He gestured for me to set up near the window, chatting as I prepared. He spoke about his workload, how stressed he was, even mentioning his fiancée. But there was something in his demeanor that made me pause, a subtle edge I couldn't quite place. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and his hands fidgeted slightly as he talked. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. About 10 minutes in, as I was laying out my supplies, Philip's tone shifted abruptly. "Do you carry a lot of cash?" he asked, his voice casual but pointed. I froze, unsure how to respond. "Not really," I said, forcing a smile. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "Just curious. You know, safety and all." That's when I noticed his posture change. He stood a little too close, blocking the door. My pulse quickened. "Actually," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I think I forgot something in my bag. Let me grab it from the car." He smiled again, but this time, it sent a chill down my spine. "You don't need to go anywhere," he said, his voice dropping. "You're not leaving." Before I could react, he lunged, shoving me back against the wall. Panic overtook me as I struggled against his grip. He pulled out a roll of duct tape from his pocket, prepared, methodical, and tried to bind my hands. Adrenaline surged. I kicked and thrashed, managing to scream loud enough to echo through the thin hotel walls. Philip cursed, trying to cover my mouth, but the commotion must have startled someone in the hallway. A loud knock sounded at the door. "Everything okay in there?" a man's voice called. Philip hesitated, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all I needed. I elbowed him hard in the ribs and darted for the door. I flung it open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. A hotel staff member stood there, his eyes wide in shock. Philip didn't chase me. When I turned back, he was already gone, vanished into the night. The police arrived quickly, and I gave them every detail I could remember. Days later, I learned about Philip's other victims, women who hadn't been as lucky. He had left a trail of violence, all under the guise of a charming, unassuming man. I escaped with my life, but not without scars. Trust is a fragile thing, and that night, mine was shattered forever. Even now, I can't shake the feeling of his grip on my wrists or the cold edge in his voice. Meeting Philip Markoff wasn't just a nightmare, it was a lesson in how easily evil can hide behind a smile.